Today, I'm going to explain a fantasy, horror, mystery film called 1408. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Author Mike Enslin arrives at the Weeping Beach Inn, tired and drenched from the rain. The hotel owners eagerly tell him about their inn's haunted history, hoping that he'd write about it in his next book. But Mike just wants to get into his room to rest. Finally, in his room, Mike sets down an unlit cigarette on the nightstand and takes the basket of mini liquor bottles, which he drinks throughout the evening. He looks around the room, checking corners for any sign of hauntings until he calls it a night and sleeps. The next day, Mike records his thoughts of the inn, commenting more about the hotel's food rather than any haunted sightings. Nonetheless, he adds the inn to his next book. Very few people attend the book signing for his new book. While answering a reader's question, Mike reveals he's never seen a real ghost, disappointing a fan. One fan asks him to sign his older book, The Long Road Home, which he wrote before entering the occult genre. The woman asks him if the father and son relationship in the book was based on real experiences, but he denies it. While surfing on the beach, a plane overhead distracts Mike, causing him to get pushed into the sea by a massive wave. He wakes up on the shore, coughing up water. After retrieving his mail from the post office, Mike finds most of them are brochures of supposedly haunted hotels. Among the mail is a postcard for the Dolphin Hotel with a warning on the back, saying don't enter 1408. Curious, he calls the hotel to book room 1408, but his booking is turned down even before he gives a date. Even when Mike requests to book it on different dates, the manager denies him and hangs up. This piques his interest further. Browsing through old newspaper reports citing the hotel, he notes 2 recorded suicides in the building. Mike calls his publisher, Sam, who helps him find a legal loophole to force the hotel to let him book the room. Sam, however, worries over Mike returning to New York for the hotel. Mike assures him that he'll be in and out of the city after the job. In New York, Mike arrives at the exquisite Dolphin Hotel. The hotel manager, Gerald Olin, tries to bribe him out of checking into room 1408. In Olin's office, he tempts Mike with an expensive liquor, but he doesn't relent. Seeing his insistence, Olin warns him that none of their guests lasted an hour in the room. Mike scoffs at it, thinking that it's just another ploy to oversell the room so he'd write about it. But Olin is adamant about not wanting Mike to stay in the room, as it would end with him cleaning up the mess after. During his employment at the Dolphin Hotel, there have been 4 deaths in room 1408, so Olin barred anyone from booking the room again. Contrary to Mike's research, there have been 56 total deaths from the same room, including heart attacks, strokes, and even drowning in a bowl of soup. Olin presents Mike with a ledger of all the deaths in the room's history, permitting him to write about the room as long as Mike doesn't stay there. Thinking that he's about to back off, Olin offers Mike the expensive liquor bottle, which Mike puts in his bag. But Mike decides he still wants to stay in the room, angering Olin. He challenges Mike to read the ledger first while telling the story of the first death in the room in gruesome detail, creeping out Mike. Olin offers Mike to stay in room 1404 instead, assuring him that the room's layout is the same, but Mike insists on authenticity. Olin laughs, noting that his books are abandoned on bargain shelves only to be read by people who want cheap thrills. Unwilling to back down, Mike asserts his belief that nothing supernatural exists, thus, he's never been scared of haunted hotels. Olin finally yields and gives him the keys to 1408. As they ride the elevator, Olin explains how the owners haven't closed the room to pretend nothing's wrong. The hotel kept the room tidy, having strict protocols to prevent accidents during housekeeping. Still, years ago, a maid gouged her eyes out with a pair of scissors after getting locked in the bathroom. Upon reaching the 14th floor, Olin gives Mike one last warning before closing the elevator doors. As he walks down the hallway, Mike shuffles through the various crime scene photos on the ledger. The elevator dings loudly, breaking him from his thoughts. Mike had walked on the floor at a full circle. He puts the ledger away and makes his way to the room, passing by a discarded food tray and finding a woman entering a room while pulling in a stroller. Mike finally faces room 1408, unlocking the door and carefully opening it. He checks from side to side before stepping into the threshold. He switches the light on, finding a normal-looking room inside. He slams the door shut before settling in. He places his unlit cigarette on the ashtray, a reminder of successfully quitting the habit. Mike expresses his disappointment on the mundaneness of the room to his tape recorder. He takes the Bible from the nightstand, then tosses it aside, uninterested. Next, he checks the minibar, then notices the thermostat is stuck at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Mike continues to describe the room's dull interior and paintings on the tape. Later, he opens a window and describes the view from the room, but bangs his head when the radio starts playing We've Only Just Begun by the Carpenters. 2 chocolate candies sit on the pillow, which wasn't there earlier. Thinking it's just a trick, he checks the closet, tub, and cabinet, expecting someone else in the room but finds no one. A movement from the vent catches his attention. Sweating, he calls the front desk to report the broken thermostat, surprised when the receptionist agrees to send a repairman. Unnerved, Mike sits on a chair as he reminisces on the many hotel rooms he's stayed in for a book. Determined to get a story, Mike reminds himself not to get rattled. Proceeding with his investigation, he uses a UV lamp to check the many traces of blood in the room. Then, Mike finds the painting above the fireplace skewed. He realigns the painting, hearing ocean waves in his mind. The sudden knock on the door makes him jump. Mike struggles to open the door for the repairman, But when it finally opens, the repairman refuses to set foot inside. Instead, he tells him how to fix the thermostat on his own. Mike successfully fixes the device but finds the repairman has left. With the room at a comfortable temperature, Mike pours himself a drink and sits on the bed. The radio at the bedside blares the same song, making him drop his drink. Suddenly, the clock on the radio counts down from 60 minutes. Mike remembers Olin's warning that no one lasted in the room for more than an hour. A ringing sounds in his ear, causing his head to ache. He checks the busy street outside the window, yet he can't hear anything but the ringing. When he looks back in the room, the window shuts, trapping his fingers. Mike gets his hand off the window and heads to the bathroom to check his wound. He washes his hand, but the water suddenly turns hot, scorching him. He wraps his wounded hand with a handkerchief, then jumps when the radio blares the Carpenter's song again. Even after the radio is unplugged, it continues to count down. Panicked from the events, he rushes to the ringing phone from the living room. Mike demands to be taken to the hospital, but the receptionist transfers him to Olin instead. While waiting to speak to Olin, Mike looks around as if expecting another threat. The line drops suddenly, so he makes his way out the door. But the key breaks in the lock, with the other end disappearing to the other side. Mike tries to force the door open, but the doorknob breaks as well. Through the peephole, he finds green eyes staring back at him. Finding no hope at the door, Mike heads to the window and yells for help. He calls a man's attention from the building across the street, but the man only copies his movements. Mike grabs a lamp to illuminate the man, revealing that it's also him wearing black clothes. Behind the other Mike, a woman attacks him with a hammer. Mike turns, finding the same woman lunging at him. He falls into a corner, but suddenly, the woman disappears. Mike checks back to the window, and the other Mike is gone. He picks up the lamp and throws it, hoping that someone will notice it. Instead, the lamp sizzles and disappears. Frustrated, he hangs his head low, believing he's gone crazy. A girl's voice calls him inside the room. Mike fumbles around, collapsing into a corner, waiting for whatever comes next. Aggravated, he scolds himself for losing focus and notes the powers of suggestion on his recorder. Then, he spots what looks like a spy cam in the vent. Mike shouts at the vent, accusing that Olin spiked his liquor, causing hallucinations. The television turns on, showing a family video of himself, his estranged wife, Lily, and their daughter, Katie. The happy memory lures Mike closer, bringing him to tears as he thinks of the family he lost. He touches the TV mournfully before it shuts off. Mike returns to the liquor bottle, thinking if it can make him hallucinate his daughter again. Suddenly, a man appears in the middle of the room, climbing over the window before jumping off. Then, a woman in a red and green dress in the living room does the same. Next, he hears the sound of a baby crying from the next room. He bangs on the wall, begging the mother he saw earlier for help. The baby wails louder until the sound echoes in his head, bringing him to his knees. Mike picks up a chair and throws it against the wall, making the wailing stop. Mike gets up, seeing the light pouring from the bathroom. From inside, a man in a wheelchair laments over his life. Mike recognizes his father, kneeling before him. His father warns him that he will end up just like him. Mike snaps out of the illusion, trying to make sense of the situation. A whirring sound distracts him, leading him to the broken wall with blood pouring from the cracks. Mike opens a window and checks the street below, wondering if he can't die in a nightmare. Deciding on a more logical approach, he checks the hotel's map behind the front door, plotting his escape through the window. Gathering his courage, he climbs onto the ledge and records a message on his tape first that if he slips and falls, it was an accident and not the room's influence. Inch by inch, Mike makes his way toward the next room's window. He counts his steps to calm himself, ignoring the sounds of traffic below. But when he looks forward, there are no other windows on the building aside from room 1408's. After nearly slipping on the ledge, he struggles back to the window where the woman in red and green surprises him. Mike falls but grabs a hold of the ledge, watching the woman throw herself out of the building. Mike climbs back inside the room, just before the window closes on its own. Exhausted, Mike gets up and notices the hotel map changed on the front door. Instead of the hotel floor's layout, he only sees room 1408 with the rest of the floor blacked out. He looks into the peephole and sees a brick wall outside his door. An eerie blue glow fills the room. The windows in the living room are bricked up while the window from the bedroom no longer exists. Driven insane, Mike listens to his tape recording in hopes of bringing back some sense. When he hears himself say that the bedroom has no window, he yelps. The sound of footsteps and an announcement diverts his attention to the living room, where he finds himself with his wife Lily in the doctor's office. The couple struggles to accept Katie's cancer diagnosis. When he calls Katie, the lights suddenly go out. The room is now covered in a red hue. Katie's voice begs him for help while Mike checks around, reaching for the light switch. With the lights on, he spots the armed woman behind him from the mirror. He turns around, but she's not there. In the living room, the thermostat is broken again, this time stuck at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. He takes his coat from his bag and checks his laptop. Mike contacts Lily via a video call, but his face is distorted on the screen. When Lily hears that he's in the Dolphin Hotel, she gets angry at him for not contacting her despite being in the city, not noticing the urgency in his tone. Suddenly, the fire sprinklers spray water, destroying his laptop. The water causes all the electronics inside to spark until Mike breaks it. Mike starts undoing the screws on the vent where he climbs to escape. Hearing the baby's cries, he follows it and begs the mother for help. The woman looks up, staring coldly at him. It's Lily. Frightened, Mike crawls forward and watches another memory where his father begs Mike to stay with his wife after Katie's death. After his other self leaves, his father looks straight at him, making him jump inside the vent. The vent stretches further, trapping Mike in a loop until he finds the dead body of one of the hotel room's victims. The body wakes up and chases after him. When Mike loses sight of it, he crawls as quietly as he can, checking every corner before moving. The corpse finds him and grabs him by the leg. He kicks its skull to escape and falls back into the room. Tired and confused, Mike opens the minibar for a drink but instead finds a miniature version of Olin's office with the hotel manager mocking him. Angered, Mike attacks the fridge, which now returns to normal. Shaking in fury and fright, Mike grabs the liquor and the Bible in hopes of being saved. But when he flips through the pages, it's blank. On the other side, he sees a vision of him and Lily joining Katie in her hospital bed. Lily encourages Katie about the afterlife, but Mike is hesitant to believe in it. After Katie died, Mike blames Lily for distracting Katie with stories about heaven. The fax machine rings in the room. Mike opens it and sees a dress come out of the machine. The room's temperature drops to below zero. He burns the crime scene photos in the middle of the living room to warm up. As he's shivering by the fire, his laptop switches on. Lily is still on the call, confirming that the cops are in the hotel. But the police are already in 1408, and it's empty. Feeling hopeless, he checks the clock in the bedroom. He has less than 15 minutes left. Lily promises to see him at the hotel, but Mike refuses, not wanting to put her in danger. Suddenly, his voice sounds from the laptop. Another Mike appears on the screen, telling Lily to hurry up and meet him in the room. Mike tries to stop Lily, but she only sees the other Mike, who winks at the camera once Lily ends the call. The room erupts in chaos. The ceiling and floor explode, bursting the pipes. The paintings in the room change into horrible violent scenes with voices crying for help. Mike reaches for the ship painting, but a wave of water pours in, throwing him against the wall. Water fills up the room, forcing Mike to sink below. Fighting for his life, he swims back to the surface, finding himself back on the beach where he nearly drowned while surfing. Mike wakes up in the hospital, seeing Lily by his side. Being his next of kin, Lily was called in after he was rushed to the hospital for nearly drowning in the beach. Mike, dazed and in disbelief, recounts the events in the Dolphin Hotel. Lily claims that there is no such hotel in New York. The days continue where he and Lily reconcile. During a dinner date, Mike spots the woman who jumped off from 1408 in the restaurant. He snaps out of the vision, realizing that he was only hallucinating. Believing that the room was just a nightmare, he shares the story with Lily, who suggests he writes about it. Days later, Mike collects his mail from the post office and finds the same mail he received the day he discovered the Dolphin Hotel. But the postcard for the hotel is missing. Confused, he checks the newspaper clippings where he learned more about the hotel's history, but they've changed. To find some closure, he writes a book about room 1408. Once he's done, he prepares his manuscript and visits his father from the elderly home. But his father's condition is worse, staring blankly into space and not even noticing him. Guilty over how he treated his father, Mike apologizes. Mike rushes to the post office to send the manuscript, but the clerk says they're closed. When the clerk turns around, he recognizes the man from the hotel. The other workers break down the post office, revealing the walls and ceiling of room 1408. The world spins before Mike, his life slipping away as he realizes that he's still in the ruins of the room. Back in the room, the mini fridge opens behind him. Instead of drinks, however, he finds Katie's coffin burning inside. Mike's mind fractures, unable to grasp how he's back. Behind him, a white door appears. Tired of being played at, Mike knocks on the door, ready to face whatever's on the other side, but it disappears. Katie appears in the room, asking him for help. Despite knowing that it's not real, Mike falls to his knees and embraces her. As he promises not to let her go, Katie's body goes limp. The radio blares the song again, and Katie's body crumbles in Mike's arms. Mike desperately tries to put her back together, but it's no use. Enraged, Mike breaks everything he could get his hands on, throwing furniture all over the room until he collapses. The song continues to play, with less than 10 seconds left on the clock. Mike turns away as the clock turns to 0. He wakes up, and the room is back to its pristine condition. The clock reverts to 60 minutes on the nightstand. The phone rings and a receptionist tells him the hour will repeat until he takes their express checkout system. In the middle of the bedroom hangs a noose for him. The events begin to make sense. All the previous victims were driven to insanity and suicide like what the room is doing to him. The room continues to tempt him with his only way out of the room. But Mike refuses to give in. He tells the receptionist that he's not checking out. The receptionist informs him that Lily is in the hotel and will arrive at the room in 5 minutes. Mike denies playing the room's games anymore. Realizing that he's led a selfish life, Mike refuses to die so he turns the liquor bottle into a Molotov cocktail and sets the bedroom ablaze, taking the room down with him. Finding some relief, Mike lights his cigarette and relaxes on the armchair. Outside, the hotel guests evacuate as the fire alarm blares. Stuck in traffic, Lily rushes to the hotel on foot. In the room, Mike listens to the hotel's futile attempt to save itself. No longer fearing the evil inside, Mike makes a recording, saying his final thoughts about the hotel. He throws the ashtray out the window, causing the room to explode. He lies on the floor, laughing as the room is defeated. Days later, Lily and Sam attend Mike's funeral. Lily takes comfort that he and Katie are finally together. After the funeral, Olin hands Lily a box of Mike's belongings from the hotel. But Lily refuses, not wanting to remember Mike by his writing. Olin assures her, however, that Mike did not die in vain. After what he did to the room, it won't be reopened again. When Lily and Sam leave, Olin heads back to his car and opens the box, listening to Mike's recording. While listening to Mike's reunion with Katie's ghost, Olin hears another girl behind the car. He checks the rearview mirror and sees Mike's burnt body. It disappears instantly, allowing Olin to watch the little girl outside reunite with her father. Back in the hotel, Mike's ghost smokes in the ruined room. Katie calls him inside, and he goes to her, disappearing as he walks.